This is the finished dizzy pattern eyeball with a radial segmented iris that we'll be describing in a two-part video series. Hello, my name is John Manure from Accu-Slice. I recently had cataract surgery, and this has inspired me to create a new project which I'm calling Dizzy Vision. It consists of two different wood turning techniques. In the first technique, I'll be making this dizzy pattern, a vortex pattern main ball for the eye. In the second part of this project, I'll be creating the iris of the eye, which is made from segmented disc. So this is the finished project with the dizzy pattern on the outside and then the iris made from this radial pattern. This video is quite long, and as a result, I'm producing it in two parts. In part one of this video, I'll be describing the production of this dizzy pattern egg. In the second part of this video, I'll be describing the production of this iris. I'm going to begin this project with the production of this laminated board, and I actually demonstrated how this board was created in several of my other videos on making my dizzy bowl projects. So I'm not going to repeat the process here completely for the actual production of this board. It's shown in those previous videos. But it begins by, first of all, cutting a bunch of thin strips using my Accu-Slice system. And these boards are each 1.5 inches wide by 32 to 34 inches long. And then I slice these into boards as thin as 1/10,000 of an inch to as thick as 150,000 of an inch thick. And these are all natural color woods. There's no dyes in these woods. These are woods from all over the world. I have woods such as Padauk and Yellow Heart and Purple Heart and Bobinga and Walnut and Maple, just all different contrasting woods. And each are arranged in a pattern, such as here. And it's a symmetric pattern. Then my center board is, in this case, a piece of maple. And on both sides of that maple, I have strips of walnut followed by Yellow Heart and cherry, and just going out, repeating that process all the way to the end of the board. You see these Yellow Heart strips through here. And the last two strips are two pieces of walnut. And after they're arranged in my pattern, I then take them into my glue jig system and I glue them up using epoxy cement. Let that dry overnight, then run that through my joiner planer to clean up the excess glue, run it through my edge sander to clean up the surfaces, and end up with a board such as this. And this particular board now is 4 inches wide. It's 32 inches long and 1.5 inches thick. And from this board, I'll lay out some round discs. And I've already laid them out on this side of the board. So I got 7 discs from this board, each of these 4 inches in diameter. I'll be cutting these out on my bandsaw. Then after they're cut out, I'll be sanding them smooth to the outer surface of that line. And then I'll run them on my Accu-Slice system again to cut some thin discs, each disc being 100,000 of an inch thick. And from each of these larger laminated discs, I'll create 11 100,000 inch thick discs. So I'll get 77 discs total out of this board. And from those 77 discs, I can produce 2 of these projects for this video. So the next step is to take this to my bandsaw and start the cutting process. Okay, I'm ready to start cutting these discs out. This board's a little bit big and unwieldy, so I'm going to be cutting it in some smaller pieces before we even start, just to make it easier to cut these out. Now you can see I cut each of those boards close to the line, but not actually touching the line. I'll be standing them right to the line so it'll be a perfect circle. Well, there's all 7 discs cut. Now I'll take these to my edge sander and sand them to the line. Okay, I'm now ready to sand these boards right to my line. And I'm using my edge sander to do that. And I'm using this because it's perfectly perpendicular to this table. So I'll get nice straight sides when I sand. I prefer using the edge sander for this project rather than my disc sander because the disc sander disc just runs too fast and it would actually burn the wood. So this edge sander works much better. Okay, I tried to sand it as close as I can to the outer edge of that line because I want all my discs to be, close to being exactly the same size as possible. Just make the assembling much easier in the next couple steps. So the trick is to sand it right to the outer edge of that line and trying to get it as smooth and accurate as possible. Now there's all 7 of my discs, all sanded to the same OD. So these are ready to go to, so next step we glue these to some sacrificial fences. I'll be slicing these discs on the automated Accu-Slice system. I could also have used a standard Accu-Slice system for this operation. I have my system all set up, and I just put a brand new 1/2-inch blade 1/8 per inch. I mounted my segmented disc on a sacrificial fence attached to this 18-inch carriage. And I just adjusted it such that the blade is flat against my surface here. My board here is about 1.65 inches wide, and I want to cut boards 100,000 of an inch thick. So the first thing I want to do is set up my system. So I want my board thickness to be 0.100 inches. My blade kerf is 45 thousandths. So my forward speed is 10 inches per minute. 11 boards, I need 1.6 inches, which is exactly what I have. The automated Accu-Slice system first moves the indexer in the thickness of the bandsaw blade plus 100,000 of an inch, and then cuts the first board. It then automatically returns to the starting position, re-indexes the board for the next cut, and proceeds to cut the remaining boards. This automated Accu-Slice system is a prototype version and is not currently available. And there I cut 11 discs from that board. For this next operation, I glued 2 of the discs to the sacrificial fence in order to speed up the cutting of the remaining disc. I moved the camera to the opposite side of the bandsaw so you can see the cutting of the disc from the front side of the bandsaw table. This video is sped up 10 times the actual cutting speed. Using the Accu-Slice system, I'm cutting at 10 inches per minute, which is quite slow, which gives you very smooth cuts. Using the automated Accu-Slice system, I just cut 77 discs off 7 boards, a total of 11 discs off each of the segmented boards, so a total of 77 discs. And I cut these very slowly. I cut these at 10 inches per minute, which is much slower than you would normally cut using the Accu-Slice system. But by cutting slowly, you get smoother surfaces, and there's no saw marks or blade marks or burn marks on these boards. They're perfectly smooth and nice. The only sanding that's required is, kind of getting rid of this burr at the end where it kicks out the end of the bandsaw, and there may be some fuzzies on the bottom edge, but I don't even see that. But these surfaces are good enough for gluing. I decided to run all these discs through my sand fleece system. This takes off a very, very small amount off the surface, and it gets rid of the burr where it kicks out the bandsaw, and also there's a little bit of fuzzies. It gets rid of those too on the edge. I don't want those fuzzies interfering with my glue joint. So I just run each side across the sand fleece disc, just one time on each side, that's it. And that cleaned them up nicely. I should get perfect glue joints now with those. Okay, I'm ready to start the glue up of these laminated discs. And I already completed 1 disc of 11. And you can see how I rotated these right around 45 degrees on my angle here. I'm using this white line here as a guide as I go down and matching up corner to corner as I go down. That should give me a decent pattern. So this is the one step that's completed. I have all my discs that I cut, and I have my lines marked on here. You can see from when I cut it. I did that when these circles were cut out of the larger board, and all these lines are in the same side of all my pieces going down. And that's kind of important because even though these are symmetric, there may be some slight difference between this side and this side. And if I were to reverse a board, they may not align properly. So I want to keep everything aligned, with those lines going forward. So keeping those lines on that side, and then using my white bar here as a guide to go down. So what I'm doing here is just rotating it. I'm using Type-On 3 glue once again for this glue up. I'm using my Dizzy glue up jig once again. And let me set my pieces so they fit pretty snugly. So I'm using my white bar as a guide. My white line here is a guide, and I'll be going forward. So I want it to be reasonably tight. These plastic sleeves have a little bit of give, so I can get things pretty tight. And I do put glue on both sides. I want to make sure I get good glue coverage. And not using an excessive amount. That's why I'm using a brush here to put it on, so I get thoroughly coated, but not overly heavy with the glue. I'm going to rotate this. And I line my white lines on both sides, just making sure that it is symmetric. Let me see, I think you can see that on the camera. So there's my white line right there, and I'm aligning corner to corner. And then I usually put some clamps on it just to push it down and set the glue. Just need to do that for about a minute just to make sure I have good contact with everything. And just let that set for about a minute. And then I'll be gluing on the next disc. Gluing up each disc layer against the previous disc layer requires very precise alignment of each layer to produce a smooth, dizzy pattern. I use magnifiers to aid in this alignment. And I'm using these plastic discs, which are 1/4 inch thick. They're polypropylene plastic. Gives me a nice flat surface and they're hard enough that nothing moves and gives me a nice tight joint. So they're just a hair smaller than my round disc here. So they don't interfere with my jig here, but they clamp everything down nice and tight. I'm using a headband magnifier to align these discs because the alignment is critical. If you're off by a few thousandths, you'll see it. So you want to get these things aligned as perfectly as you can, and the magnifiers help achieve that alignment. You can also use clamps if you want. I just C-clamp like I put in the center, and I'll clamp everything down just to make sure the glue is in good contact with everything. I continue to add layers, one layer at a time, and making sure each subsequent disc is perfectly aligned until I get like 5 or 6 discs. Okay, I'm ready to put on my 6th disc, and after 5 or 6 discs, I take this and put it in my press and let it dry for half an hour and make sure that there's good contact between all the layers. So I don't do usually more than 5 or 6 at a time. And once I put it in the press, I'll let it dry for probably half an hour before I add the final 5 layers. So let me take this to my press now, and I'll put it in the press for half an hour. And I do pull it out to make sure nothing is slipped. Double check the alignment. Yeah, sometimes when you put additional pressure on with the press, the disc may slip and slide a little bit, so I always double check the alignment, make sure nothing's moved. And if it's moved, I realign it before I put it back in the press. And I check both sides. And so let that dry for half an hour, and then I'll add the remaining 5 layers. Okay, I just took this out of the press. It was in there for about a half an hour. So now I'll glue on the remaining 5 layers. As was shown previously, I continue to add layers. I add a total of 11 layers. These 11 layers are all from the same disc, so they should be perfectly aligned. All 11 layers are now stacked and glued up in a glue-up jig. Okay, let me take this to my press next, and we'll clamp it in place. Make sure nothing slips. And let that dry for like another half an hour. Okay, now I have 2 sets of 11 discs, so I'm going to glue these 2 together to make a disc of 24 layers, or excuse me, 22 layers. And I'm using my Dizzy glue jig with the larger bars. I have a nice joint, all the glues coming out all sides. The alignment is still on. I could also have clamped this in my press. After clamping, I allow it to dry for at least an hour before I proceed further. Okay. To get better use of my boards, I'm cutting this center out, and this will become the center ring for this project, and this will become a top ring. So I have a circle here about 2.7 inches in diameter. Okay, I'm now ready to glue up my laminated disc to complete my project. And I have these 2 sections of these laminated discs which were rotated at slight angles, and I had to glue these 2 together to make a continuous piece. And this will be the center portion of my project. And this is hollow because that's going to be my outside diameter, and the pieces I cut out of that will end up on the top and bottom to make it a little bit larger. So now I'm ready to start gluing this up. Okay, I aligned my pieces. Now I'll go put this in my press since it's too big to put my clamps on. That's good. I've even squeezed out the glue on all sides. So I'll let that dry for at least half an hour. And this is a completed glued up block ready for turning on the lathe. Okay, I'm ready to start turning this, and I'm just going to do an initial turning because I won't do a final turning until I'm ready to put the iris into this. But you're going to make basically a round sphere, so that's my template that I'm going to use to judge how I'm doing it. So it should go this way, but I won't go the whole way in here. In turning down these dizzy pattern blanks, my preference is to use the carbide tools. And this tool here is a round carbide tool. It's a brand new bit. I just put a new bit on it. And I also have a pointed tool which I'll use for getting into the section right there and way between the dizzy pattern and the base. I continue to shape the round ball using my round carbide cutter and really just do the shaping by eye. And then I switch to this pointed tool to shape the top and also the bottom section near the base. I also like to use this diamond beading tool from D-Way Tools to create the bottom bead on the base. I finished sanding starting with a 100 grit sandpaper and then going all the way down to 400 grit sandpaper. This concludes part 1 of this 2-part video series on production of this Dizzy Vision project. In this video we described the production of this vortex or dizzy pattern sphere, and then in part 2 of this video series I'll describe the production of this iris to complete the project. So once again, thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions or concerns, please give us a call or drop us an email. We'll be happy to hear from you.